Hello everyone, I'm Tamara Banks. Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Denver DA. Mitch, always great to see you.
Good to see you, Tamara.
You have someone on your team with us today. Introduce him to
Yeah,
us.
one of the most important parts of our team. I have Senior Chief Deputy Lamar Sims, and you know, Lamar and I have worked together for 30 years. He's one of the only people in the Denver DA's office, one of the lawyers, that's been there longer than I have and been there throughout the last 30 years. So Lamar actually predates me in the DA's office, but there were a couple of times when we went through where I actually picked up his caseload. So we do have some defendants in common, and I got to tell you, some of them are still in the penitentiary.
Wow. So you know all the secrets in the DA's office.
I know many of them.
You know many. Well, let's talk about the difference between police-involved shooting and every other kind of shooting. Why is the DA's office called in, and why are you specifically called in to do that investigative work?
Well, there are a number of things going on. We believe that when government takes somebody's life, or when government uses physical force by shooting, it's one of the most important things vis-a-vis the citizens and the way they view government and the way they view policing. It's incredibly impactful for the community, it's impactful for the law enforcement community, and we believe that it's important for us to be involved from the beginning to make sure that the investigation from the criminal legal perspective is thorough, it's fair, and it proceeds in an orderly fashion.
I know that I've seen you over the years out at crime scenes, and walk us through the protocol, you know, for the layperson. How does that work for people who don't know?
When an officer is involved in a shooting in Denver, regardless what the agency is, a number of things happen pretty much automatically. First of all, the officer will make, or should make, a call out to the radio that he or she has been involved in an officer-involved shooting. At that point, the radio room, the dispatcher has a protocol. A number of individuals are called out. The head of the Crimes Against Persons Bureau or the Major Crimes Bureau, the homicide investigators, and members of our office, either the district attorney, me, or one other senior chief deputy, or all three of us, will be alerted. I'm usually the first person from our office to be alerted. I will head out to the scene, I will speak with the district attorney, and we'll make some decisions. At the scene, the uniformed supervisors are trained to secure the scene. And that's true in any major crime scene, regardless whether it's an officer-involved shooting or not. And that means identifying witnesses, trying to figure out what our scene is, where the evidence may be, and sequestering the officers that are involved, taking them away from the crime scene, making sure that they don't talk to other officers, to other witnesses, and run the risk of contamination. So that's the initial part of the investigation.
Mitch, this sounds like a pretty important piece of the whole investigative piece from your perspective in the DA's office.
It's really important not only for our office, the police department, but like Lamar said, it's critical to the community. You know, a lot of times there are racial issues involved, or at least that are raised. They're usually not involved in the shooting at all, but oftentimes after the shooting is over, you determine, well, it was a young person that was killed, it was a person maybe of a certain race, that type of thing, and there's people in the community then that are very upset about that. And so what we try to do is be as transparent as possible. And a big part of our system, unlike many other systems, is our system is been in place for 30 years. And it's a transparent system. It's the kind of system that then has been adopted or stolen just outright by other agencies across the United States. Lamar often gets called, I get called, you know, we hear you have this protocol, we hear you have this in place and it really works well for your community. What can we do to adopt some of the things that you've been doing? The Boston DA, for instance, stole our program, and he says it was in a presentation that he did about police shootings, and I'm sitting there and he's saying, well, you know, really, Mitch Morrissey should be doing this presentation because we stole this from them. It works for us in Boston, and it's worked for us in Denver for a long time. There's ways that you can do these investigations that the facts never get out. The community never knows what happened. We could take all of these to a grand jury, for instance, and if we did that, those are secret. And unless the grand jury indicts and charges the officer, and then we actually have a trial, which of course is public, or writes a report, which they don't always do, you don't know what happened. You don't know what the officer said happened. You don't know what the witnesses said happened. So what we try to do is be as transparent as possible. And in doing that, then we make a decision. We put it in a letter. We explain not only the facts, but we also explain the law that applies, and we have a whole protocol that we attach as well. We put that on the internet. We put every letter on the internet. If somebody says, well, wait a minute, I don't trust the letter that you wrote, Morrissey, I want to see the things that happened, they can make an appointment, come down to our office and say, hey, you know, I want to see these things. And other than actual bloody knives or bullets and guns, because we'll have photos of those, they're going to be able to come down, see the statements that we record of the officers if they choose to make a statement, and almost 100% of the time in the last 30 years, the Denver police officers have made a statement. You'll see the civilian statements. You can come down and review all of those things. There's always a lot of controversy around these things. There's a lot of complaints about them, but very rarely does anyone ever take the time to come down and actually see what happened. And that, I think, is sad, because we built this whole system so people can know and will know. In the course of the last 10 years, you can count the number of people that have come down and educated themselves about these cases, no matter how controversial they are, on one hand.
And citizens can just come down and
They have to make an appointment.
Okay.
They can come down and see it. The only people that come are ambulance chasing lawyers that want to sue the city of Denver, or reporters. And usually, unfortunately, it's reporters that are coming down and almost doing a nostalgic kind of retrospective type story. They're not coming down and looking at the actual story, looking at the actual statements, the reports, everything that's in our file, to write a story about what happened. And, you know, we used to have an assistant chief deputy, that Deputy Chuck Lepley, he used to say that, well, you know, a lot of those activists, a lot of the community people, they don't want to be encumbered by the truth. And what we try to do is be as truthful as possible in these letters, so people can see what happened, they can understand why we can't do, for instance, we can't bring charges. You know, we have a very limited scope in this system. Our system, our part of the role is to determine if we can bring charges, if there's a likelihood of conviction, a reasonable likelihood of conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And if we can't do that, and if we can't disprove things like self-defense, or that it was a defense of someone else, those types of things, then we can't bring those charges ethically. Now, there's a lot of things that go on in these police shootings that sometimes are a violation of policy, sometimes a violation of common sense, all of those kinds of things. But that's not our job. We're not in the job of disciplining an officer for violating a policy like shooting into a car or something like that. That's the police department's job. That's the city's job. That may cost the officer their job or something along those lines. Our sole role in this is to determine if we can bring charges or not. I think there's a lot of people out there that think we wouldn't charge a police officer even if we could. And, you know, that's just not true. I mean, if there's a police officer out there that shot somebody and it's murder, we're going to bring those charges.
Yeah, well, you're right. A lot of people think there's a strong relationship between the two offices, the two departments, that, you know, one protects the other.
Yeah, and I think that's just not true at all. I mean, when these things happen, there is a very strict protocol that's in place. This isn't, you know, building the airplane while you're flying it. We've been doing this for a long time. Step 1, step 2, and all those steps are followed. And when we get to the result at the end, and if it's something that we can bring charges, we bring those charges. If they're not, then we explain why we can't. And it isn't, oh, well, we used a grand jury and that's all secret. I think what's important is that we're as transparent as we can be. Lamar mentioned why that's important, because the community deserves to know those answers.
It sounds like at the end of the day, what you really want is to instill confidence by the community, that they can depend on you and that you're trying.
Confidence in the community, and excuse me, Chairman, is incredibly important, because if the community doesn't have confidence in its law enforcement, in its prosecutors, it becomes incredibly difficult for us to hold people responsible in other contexts. If the community loses confidence, and I've seen this across the nation in certain cities, in its policing, the prosecutors aren't going to get juries that will convict in other cases on the testimony of police officers. The community has to have confidence in that sense. It's also important in terms of the community's ability, or the police department's ability, to police the streets. If people aren't going to listen to a police officer, then we will have increasing problems vis-a-vis the community. So confidence in our job is, I believe, incredibly important. The prosecutor has an enormous amount of authority and responsibility in these areas.
So obviously, officer-involved shootings in Denver involve Denver police officers, but in the past year...
The officer-involved shootings in Denver, again, our protocol is any law enforcement agency that engages in use of force in the Second Judicial District or the City and County of Denver.
So that was going to be my next part of the question. Is a lot of them are Denver, I should say, but there are other agencies involved.
Sure.
So talk a little bit about that, Lamar, and how you deal with that. Or the protocol is the same, I imagine.
Well, we follow the same protocol, and the other agencies in the metropolitan area understand that. In the last year, I believe, I'm just counting offhand, I think we had 8 officer-involved shootings in our jurisdiction in 2014. 4 of them involved agencies from outside that, for one reason or the other, took action in the City and County of Denver. We follow the same protocol with a couple of exceptions that don't really relate to the criminal investigation. In Denver, Mitch worked very hard on the issues of transparency, and one of the things he allowed was the Office of the Independent Monitor to take a certain, I don't want to say oversight role, but to monitor parts of our investigation. That only applies to the Denver Police Department, Denver Sheriff's Department, Denver Fire Department. So if Aurora police come into Denver and engage in action here, the OIM would not be involved in watching our investigation.
Gotcha.
So if the FBI kills somebody, and they've got people on the streets all the time, they have task force we work with. We had a state patrolman, people will remember, shoot somebody on the floor of the Capitol. We handled that. And so I think that a lot of times people, and you talked about the relationship between the Denver DA's office and the Denver Police Department. Well, half of the investigations that we did last year that were fatal shootings involved departments that we have very little to do with. State Patrol, one was involved, a theft of a motorcycle up in North Denver by the district station, actually up there. An undercover state patrolman shot somebody in the course of trying to apprehend them and trying to protect his own life. Aurora oftentimes comes into Denver. We had a shooting last year which was not fatal, but where an officer shot another officer, and both officers were from outside Denver, and both officers were from different departments. So, you know, a lot of things happen in Denver, and most of our police shootings involve the Denver Police Department in one way or another. But I think, to be along lines of what Lamar said, we are true to that protocol, no matter what department, no matter who's, you know, it's being investigated by Denver Homicide. And with the exception of, unless we have a very close connection, and we haven't had one in 10 years, but we did have in the Mena case, for instance, our chief investigator at the time, brother was involved in the shooting. So he worked in our office. His brother was one of the people involved in the shooting. And because of that, we got the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office involved in doing the same role that we did. And actually, they determined that that shooting was not something that they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt because they can't disprove. And that's really where the rubber meets the road in these kinds of situations. Can you disprove what the officer is saying as far as defending himself? And sometimes you can. You know, sometimes you have a witness. Now they have video. Sometimes you can prove the officer's not telling the truth here. And the last time that happened in Denver, there was a charge brought against the officer. The officer was tried for murder, and the jury acquitted him. But we believed there was a reasonable likelihood of conviction. We made sure charges were brought there, and we tried that officer, and the jury acquitted him. But, you know, that's the kind of thing that we're in a business that we really don't have control over what a jury does. We present our case, we do the best we can, and, you know, we live and die with what the jury does. One of the hardest things for me to explain to my young prosecutors, they say, well, you know, the jury's out, it's been out for a long time. It's like, our job is to present the evidence in the case. We believe we have a reasonable likelihood of conviction, we do that. Did you do the best job you could? And they say, yeah, I did. Well, we don't convict people, juries do, or judges do. You did your job, that's what's important. Here, we have that area where people think, oh, you know, they never charged the police, but we do. And in the last, I think, 15 years or so, we've charged 70 Denver police officers with different types of crime, from DUI to reckless driving, careless driving resulting in death, sexual assault of a woman that an officer put in the back of his patrol car and he raped. He's in the penitentiary. So this idea that we shy away from prosecuting law enforcement that has violated the law just is one of those myths that we always do our best to try to explain. But in the area of a police shooting, you have another layer, and that layer is disproving something that the officer is saying. Interesting, the editorial people will call me and say, well, why did you pay so much attention to what the officer said happened? And it's one, is it supported by the facts? And two, that's what the defense in the case is going to be. I was in fear for my life, I was in fear for my partner, I was in fear for a citizen, and that's why I did what I did. So that's the critical piece, and that's the self-defense aspect of it.
And it's a complicated process all the way through.
I think that one of the things that we see is a lack of understanding of the constitutional and statutory bases that we're working under. And the law makes it clear that law enforcement may use a reasonable force in a number of circumstances to arrest somebody. And the question becomes, what is reasonable? And we look to the United States Supreme Court because it has given us guidance in some major cases in the last 30 years, particularly in use of force and use of deadly physical force. And the Supreme Court talks about, you look at the objective reasonableness is the standard. That is, could a reasonable officer in the specific officer's footprints could that officer have taken the same steps as was taken in the specific case? So what the court is saying is we're not going to look into an officer's motivation, into an officer's biases, prejudices, but whether a reasonable officer confronted with the same facts and circumstances could have taken certain steps. That becomes an issue often in the high-profile types of cases that Mitch was talking about, because often we will learn facts, after the incident that a reasonable officer didn't know or could not have known at the time. The community may react to facts learned later. For example, if looking around the nation, say you have a 12 or 13-year-old boy with a toy gun. We learn that later. The question is, what did the officer know at the time? What should a reasonable peace officer have known at the time when he or she took the steps that led to the use of physical force or deadly physical force? Part of the fact-finding that we engage in is making that determination not with 20/20 hindsight, but what we knew at the time. It's a difficult thing, I think, for a lot of people to understand
Right.
when they are questioning Mitch's decision when they're questioning the actions taken by a law enforcement officer.
So with that said, and Mitch, you talked about how Boston, for example, is one of the many cities and jurisdictions that uses Denver DA's protocol as a blueprint, as a template. How is Denver's protocol different from some of the other cities? What makes it unique?
There are a couple of things, and Mitch alluded to two of them that I think are critical. First is the fact that he will make the investigation open to any citizen. The second is, if no charges are filed, what we refer to as the decision letter that he releases, going through the facts as we have determined them, the law that guides us, and the analysis of the application of the facts to the law and his conclusion. A couple of things that you touched on early on in the investigation. Many cities may not have the prosecutor involved or involved in the Q&A of the officer. The prosecutors, the district attorney or Doug or myself, will sit down with the lead investigators and determine who we believe should be interviewed on camera, as opposed to who is not a witness, but simply somebody who's there at the time. We will be present in terms of legal determinations such as whether we need a search warrant, whether somebody should be advised of their rights as opposed to questioned as a citizen witness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the role of the prosecutor early on in the investigation can help with some of those other issues, and other agencies may not do it that way, don't do it that way.
You know, there's interesting because we do have police officers from other jurisdictions that come into Denver and get involved in fatal shootings. There was one a few years ago up in Sloan's Lake, and Sloan's Lake is on the border of Lakewood and Denver. It was a Lakewood police officer, it was a police chase, it was a scenario where the individual was driving this car, hitting other cars, jumped from the car. Now he's in Sloan's Lake Park, which is Denver. So Lakewood police officer chasing him on foot.
It was at 4:30 in the afternoon.
And you have this guy turn back with a gun to the officer. The officer shot and killed him. He saw the gun, he saw the danger, he reacted the way that he did, and he killed the individual. It's about 4 in the afternoon. It was a summer day, and we were able to conduct our entire field investigation, crime scene investigation, and basically move downtown to do the videotaping of all the witnesses, including the woman that was with him. And we got everybody on videotape. And a helicopter flew over, did the crime scene, and we're leaving. And it's not dark yet because of daylight savings. Mm-hmm. And the Lakewood police officers are standing there looking at us. The commander says to me, "Mitch, you guys are done with the scene?" We said, "Yeah." "There's going to be people jogging in this park tomorrow. How do we hold this scene for 2 or 3 days?" And they said that the task force that investigates these in Lakewood would not even be here yet. And we have done the entire crime scene and now are headed down to the second phase, which is that interview phase that Lamar talks about. We use all the technology that we can use. We use the crime lab. We actually started using videotape, I would say 30 years ago. Now, of course, it's all digitized and all of that. But that's an incredible part of this because we capture what the witnesses say. We capture what the officers say. And it's not just a written statement. You can see the emotion when an officer is describing how he had to end somebody's life and how he was in fear for his own life. That kind of thing. That gives you a sense of what that's going to play out when you're hearing that officer testify to that on the witness stand. And a big part of our job is we'd have to disprove what he did was reasonable or what she did was reasonable. Mm-hmm. To actually be able to see that and capture that, I don't think people really understand that. That's what you'd be seeing on the witness stand.
Right.
And is there a reasonable likelihood of disproving that? I don't think so a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And so to have that actually captured, and we've been doing that for what, as long as VCRs have been around.
Right.
Yeah, we started
And
in
it's
1980.
been an important tool for us in making the determination that we then have to sit down and make if we're going to charge somebody with murder or not.
And we're going to have you back for another half an hour because this is an incredible conversation, but we're out of time already. Thanks so much for joining us. And I think it's incredible that people can come down and look at the information themselves. Thank you to Deputy DA Lamar Sims for being our guest today with Denver DA Mitch Morrissey on this edition of Dialogue Denver DA. I'm Tamara Banks. We'll see you next time.